it's something that sort of lies beyond the capacity of man's reason.
Yeah, and I actually agree, but there's hope, and I'll tell you why. But I wanna get into the conversation a little bit, find out your background and stuff. So.
We can get it.
Yeah, but it's definitely. I think that it's. I mean, the fact that life. Well, number one, I feel like the fact that there's sentience, that there's conscious experience occurring.
Yeah.
That I mean, that I don't. It's something that, at least I don't. I think it's kind of very difficult to deny the fact that, obviously we're having a sentient experience. Like it's not. There isn't just like some void of darkness. That's. I mean, there was at some point at least.
I mean, before we were born, we don't know what.
Yeah.
What happened.
But the fact that and this is, for me, I feel like this is. I mean, I guess we can wait until the
Well, it's actually running.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. So.
All right. So
we don't even have to talk to the camera, but I will. I don't know your name yet. What's your name?
Felipe.
Felipe. I'm Jeff.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I think I would rather have it like formally, so you can have I don't know if you have questions prepared.
Well, yeah, I do. So the main question is, what is your current belief about life after death, or eternity, I guess, that sort of thing?
So my belief is, I've arrived at this belief through. For a long time, I was always interested in psychedelics and consciousness and just what consciousness is, and it started when I was young. I always
psychedelic drugs.
Yes.
Yeah.
From an early age, I was always fascinated with the fact of experience. It's a phenomenon that I find that I think a lot of us take for granted, or at least I suppose that a lot of us take for granted. I'm not in the minds of other people, but
right, yeah, don't hear too many people talking about it.
Well, not only do you not hear too many people talking about it, but from what I experienced, people just sort of conform to life.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? They just sort of they're born into the world, and then they become absorbed in the order of society, and just start going to the job.
Something about was it? I don't know my philosophers very well, but Aristotle or someone was talking about the unexamined life is not worth living, or I don't know. But how often do people self-reflect?
Well, I think it's hard. I think it's difficult.
Yeah.
I think it's difficult in this type of world, because we live in a type of world in which, we're immediately from the time we're born, we're immediately indoctrinated.
Yeah.
We're immediately whether we're indoctrinated into some sort of religious worldview, whether we're indoctrinated into the materialistic scientific worldview, whether we're indoctrinated into some sort of nationalistic worldview, whether we're indoctrinated into, even just going to school is a form of indoctrination. We're being programmed.
Oh, definitely.
Everything.
I'm a high school teacher, but so I see it all the time.
So essentially,
not that I try to do it, but
it's inevitable.
Yeah.
We have to do it. So that's what education is. Education is the conditioning of the mind.
Mm-hmm.
We can't talk about it in any other way except as the conditioning of the mind. There's a mind, the mind of the child, and the mind of the child is through education being conditioned.
Yeah.
Being programmed.
Now I wanna say this, that it would be easy to look at that indoctrination, I guess, as a bad thing, because it's why can't people think for themselves, right? But and this kind of applies to religion and theology, is that a lot of people have a personal experience with the spiritual, kind of like a person would have when they go down to the seashore, right? And they experience the power of the waves and the wind and everything, the vastness of it. And then there's the experience you have when you look on a map and you realize this little section of the ocean is there's so much more to it out there.
Yeah.
And I couldn't have experienced that myself. I needed the experiences of others to make those maps. See what I'm saying? And so theology is kind of like that as far as in Christian theology, but I also think maybe even philosophy and other religions, we benefit from the experiences of others, you know? It's just that the first one that we experience is the person trying to indoctrinate us as, you know, our parents' belief, probably.
Right. But I don't think that that's a bad thing.
Right.
I don't think that there's anything inherently wrong or bad about how that's just I look at that as just an aspect of nature.
Yeah.
You know, when
as far as indoctrination, right?
As far as the conditioning of the mind of the child,
education,
born into the world, that's just something that happens in nature. That's the way that I look at it, at that phenomenon.
It's almost like indoctrination means doctrine or teaching comes into you, right? And and for someone to look at indoctrination as a bad thing is almost an insult, because it's like, do we really think people can't think for themselves? You know,
Right.
I mean, all they're doing is learning another worldview.
Well, I think, well, who knows? But so whether it's even possible to think for oneself, you know, unless one is, you know, first of all educated in language, you know, who knows? Because I think that you might even have to have language in order to begin to think.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
part of the indoctrination process, the conditioning process of the mind is teaching language to the child.
Yeah.
And again, this is why I say that I don't think it's bad. I don't think it's bad because it's just a process. It's just a process that it can be bad, it can be good, depending upon, you know, subjective opinion of maybe for example, a child is being indoctrinated into a certain religion, and being taught to accept the tenets of a certain religion. And from the point of view of some other group, that religion doesn't have the answer. And so from the point of view of this group, you know, that's bad. You know, you're indoctrinating the child into a false faith.
Yeah.
You know, but that's a subjective view. You know, that's something that's true only from the point of view of this particular group outside of that religion.
Yeah.
But if you sort of just stand out, distance yourself from all the groups, without identifying with any group, and just observe this process in the same way as you would observe a cloud passing through the sky. It's just a phenomenon of nature.
Yeah.
And then it sort of brings into question the whole idea of free will, and are human beings, you know, is human society something which is happening? Is human history something which is the product of the will of man, or is human history something which is inevitable, which is determined by the same laws which determine the motions of the planets?
Yeah. So first of all, what were you indoctrinated in? Like, what religion did you grow up in, or what's your background, your family background, I guess?
Well, my family background was, we're Roman Catholic, but in name only.
Okay.
So we never really went to church. We went to church on like holidays and stuff like that. And then when people were
big events.
Yeah, when people were getting baptized or whatever. But beyond that, you know, religion wasn't really a central theme at all.
Did you get confirmed in that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So like those big celebrations we did, but like beyond that, you know, it was just religion was ignored.
Okay.
Essentially, and because of that, you know, growing up in the modern, I guess you can. So like our education system is very materialistic. So I grew up learning, you know, the materialistic form of science and all that. So I actually ended up becoming a pretty hardcore atheist.
You did?
Yeah. I was a very hardcore atheist for a while, in my early 20s. And I was just adamantly against the church, adamantly against any religion, adamantly against any belief in any deities or God.
Like, it's one thing to not believe in God, but what made you back then like opposed to it. Like I'm thinking like speaking out against them, and
Well,
putting them down.
looking back at it now,
Mhm.
what made me adamantly against them was the same thing that would make one group against the indoctrination of another child into a particular religion that contradicts their beliefs.
Yeah.
Is, in other words, what made me adamantly against religion is my subjective opinion.
Okay.
That nothing else besides that.
So do you feel like if you got in, say, a debate with a theist,
at that point in my life?
at that point in your life, that if you could win that debate, it would validate your own beliefs somehow, or
Essentially, at that point, it was it wasn't even about winning a debate. It was about it was just about more like preserving the ego.
yeah,
More like just defending the opinion.
your own opinion.
Yeah, rather than
Yeah.
trying to establish where the truth lies.
So maybe it's like being a little bit unsure about being an atheist, and so
No, I was definitely very sure about
Yeah.
the fact that there is no God, about the fact that religion.
Did you feel like you were outnumbered,
In what sense?
like in a minority as an atheist?
No, I felt like atheism was, from my point of view at that time, I looked at atheism as something which was increasing and which was more prominent.
So the right side of history, right?
From the point of view of that Felipe, the
Yeah.
early 20s Felipe, yeah, like atheism was the right side of history.
Yeah.
I did look at that as, we're the right side. The science, materialistic, rational thinkers versus the dogmatic, believing in fantastic beings somewhere out in some
Flying
metaphysical
spaghetti
realm.
monster.
Yeah, or whatever. So I essentially looked at religion as naive,
Okay.
as these sort of and this is I feel like this is how a lot of atheists still do look at religion, as like this believing in these ancient mythologies that were written by people who didn't really have an understanding of nature. And so the common atheist argument is that now that we have science, we don't need to resort to all of these fantastical explanations of
Yeah.
gods and etc.
Yeah.
We have science now.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where I was for a long time. And that's I don't know how it happened, but it happened that I became interested in the subject of consciousness.
Okay.
And so that's, I started reading a lot about what consciousness is, and how is it possible for sentience and for experience to come into existence as a product of chemical interactions in the brain.
Yeah.
That's that was, for me, that was a very big puzzle that I really wanted to get to the bottom.
Yeah.
What's actually happening there? How am I right now at this very moment able to sit down, think, and wonder how am I experiencing the world
Yeah.
as a result of just pure chemical reactions?
Yeah.
Like what's going on there? That's a riddle that for me, that was a big time riddle that I felt like it was just I feel like that was the purpose of my life, to try to figure that out.
So did you figure it out?
Nothing else mattered to me.
Yeah.
Well, I made an attempt to.
Yeah.
I definitely made an attempt to. I started getting my hands on every single book I could on the topic. Any kind of philosophy of mind author who had written anything about it, I was reading.
Yeah.
And I got into people like Immanuel Kant. I don't know if you're familiar with Immanuel Kant.
Yeah, I'm aware of him, but I haven't.
Schopenhauer, Bishop Berkeley. I got into all kinds of ideas, and so at some point I came to realize that, and this is why I think that studying philosophy is good, because I feel like it sort of it demonstrates to you things that normally they appear obvious, but they're not very commonly known. in philosophy, we have two general schools of thinkers. They're the realists, and they're the idealists.
Okay.
Are you familiar with the distinction between the two?
Well, I mean, I know what the words mean, but I don't know as far as like the way you're using it. Yeah.
So
Maybe I should.
well, it can be the difference between the two groups can be stated really clearly. The realists, they're the group of thinkers who believe that the world as it exists, or the world as it appears to our perception, is the world that exists. So, for example, that tree, the realist will say, that's a tree. There's a tree there.
Yeah.
Your perception is a sort of a flashlight, which reveals that tree. And when you turn off the flashlight, when you turn off perception, for example, when the body dies, the tree's still there.
Yeah.
The perception is gone, but the tree remains. The world that you're observing is there, independently of your perception. And perception, essentially all perception does is it just shines a light on the tree and it reveals it. But the tree is there whether there's a perceiving subject or whether there isn't. That's the realists' school. They're the ones who say that the world is real.
Yeah.
Now there's another, and these are the two general. Each school can be subdivided into further categories, but these are the two general schools. So that's the realist school. The idealist school says no, that tree's not there. That tree is an image that is generated through the process of perception. Perception doesn't actually reveal to you the world as it exists, but it constructs an image of a world. The idealist essentially says that at the core of reality, what exists is just pure abstract, non-physical interactions of, maybe we can call it energy, we can call it some sort of mathematical principle at the core of reality, we can call it God, we can call it whatever we want. But at the core of reality there exists this substance, this primordial substance. It's non-physical, it's just pure, force, pure energy. And this energy, depending upon how it interacts with itself, at some point can initiate this thing that we're experiencing as consciousness. And through consciousness, it interacts with other. So I guess you can think of it as a. This is what the idealist would say. The idealist would say is the universe is just one giant ocean. It's one giant ocean of pure energy.
The idealist would say that.
Yeah, the idealist would say this. It's just all energy. It's non-physical energy. It's just waves of energy. And sometimes the waves of energy interact with each other. And depending upon how they interact with each other, certain reactions can be produced. And one of these reactions is the reaction that we experience as our consciousness. And that consciousness, in turn, reacts with the rest of the energy in a way that it interprets it, it translates it into either the color red, either the image of a tree, the sound of an A on the piano, or a sensation of heat or cold, or whatever. But what the idealist is saying is that the world that you're experiencing all around you is just perception's way of translating energy into subjective forms, into subjective images. There isn't. So the realist says that's a tree. There's a tree there, whether you're perceiving it or not. The idealist says no. That tree is just an image generated by a process called perception. And so that's essentially the
did you studied all this on your own, or
this was entirely
attended college, anything like that?
I attended college, and I did study philosophy courses, but even
more on your own too,
especially on my own. So I feel like whether it was in college or whether it was just me on my own, it was definitely something that I was.
Do you feel like you're coming down on one school rather than the other one?
I definitely for a long time I was a part of the realists.
Yeah.
And eventually I went over to the idealist school.
Yeah. So the realist would be during the atheist phase?
Yeah.
Because you're a material, it's like nothing really exists unless it's really there. Like, you know what I mean? Like a materialist point of view. Yeah.
So the materialist would say, you're from, this is a very well-known question that's posed, a philosophical question. If a tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound? That's actually a profound philosophical question. And the materialist, the realist would say, well, of course it does. If there's a forest that is somewhere off in an isolated region with no ears at all nearby, no human ears, no sentient subjects to hear the tree fall, will the tree still make a noise? The realist would say, well, of course it does. Every time a tree...
I think that would be a realist then.
Yeah, the tree of course makes a noise. The tree undoubtedly makes a noise.
Yeah.
There needs to be no sentient subject there with ears in order for that tree to make the noise that it makes.
Yeah.
And the idealist would say, well, that's just wrong. That's simply not the case, because here's what happens. What happens is when the tree falls, it sends off vibrations. There's just vibrations. And these vibrations, if there's an ear nearby, will interact with the eardrum of that ear.
Oh, okay.
And so once they interact with the eardrum of that ear, the eardrum then initiates another interaction with the nervous system of the body.
Yeah.
And through the nervous system, eventually the information of the wave, the frequency of the wave, is sent to the brain, the computer of the nervous system of the body. And the brain interprets the frequency of the waves and registers that information, and finally concludes in creating the what it thinks the sound, what the tone of the sound is.
Yeah.
But if that process does not occur, the idealist says, then there's no sound. There's just the energy that comes out. But without the ear and the nervous system and the brain and everything to interpret it as a sound, it's just energy.
So how do your thoughts about that translate into religious beliefs or lack of beliefs? I guess is what I would say. Like, what would be the practical application of what you're talking about?
So this is actually what got me to look more into religion, because you're familiar with the opening of John, right? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was God.
Yeah.
And without Him, nothing was made that was made, etc. I interpreted that as, or at least I came to interpret that as, perception. Perception is the Word. Perception is the Logos. Perception is that which actively creates the world. You get rid of perception, and there's nothing. And this is the idealist point of view. So remember, the idealist point of view is the point of view that says that perception creates the sound of the tree falling. You eliminate the ear, you eliminate the perceiver, there's just information that's uninterpreted by any subject. There's no subject there to interpret the information, and hence it's just abstract numbers. It's just abstract mathematical information. It needs a subject to interact with it to evoke sound, to evoke the sound of the tree. And so this is, when I read the opening of John, I suspect that whoever wrote that was probably talking was probably poetically expressing idealism. Even logos, the word logos, the word that whoever wrote the passage used the word logos. And logos in Greek means, I guess you can translate it as the word. The word.
I mean,
meaning.
There's so many parallels between the first chapter of John and the first chapter of Genesis. And so God comes in, like in the beginning, God created. Already we have a being that transcends time because he was there in the beginning. So in 5 words, it's already saying who existed, who created God? God already existed before creation. There was no creation. God is an eternal being. He speaks, and I guess you could apply this idea that someone has to hear it for it to make sense. I mean, already God said, "Let us." So it's referring to God as an individual, but then it's saying "let us" as a plural. In the same sentence, there's like this contradiction, and so who heard God speak? The other members of the Trinity. Christianity would say, other religions, if they're monotheistic religions, they can't say that. God spoke and no one heard it. But Christianity would say, yeah, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. I mean, it was already the three persons of God. It's not, we don't know that it was three from Genesis, but we know God was in multiple forms, able to communicate.
What's your personal interpretation of the Trinity? What meaning do you derive from that? What does that mean to you? What does the Trinity mean?
So a good understanding of the Trinity affects so many other areas of the Bible and an understanding of the Bible that I couldn't point to just one meaning for it. But almost all the cults that I say cult, I mean religions that claim connections to Christianity, but they've veered off away from it somehow.
The branches?
Yeah, so not necessarily like denominations, because they believe in the Trinity, right? But those that claim to be Christian but aren't, like Jehovah's Witnesses or the Mormons, or even Islam is originated from.
Yeah, it's a sort of
and so
Abrahamic.
And it comes from, they all agree that Jesus was not the Son of God. When I say the Son of God, I try to be, I try to specify that Jesus was not the Creator.
He was sort of like an instrument.
Well, I try to say Jesus was the Creator. He was God's Son in that he had the same essence of God as being the Creator.
He was God in the flesh.
God in the flesh. So Islam, the Mormon Church, Jehovah's Witnesses, they would all say that Jesus was created by God. Mm-hmm. And so, which means there was a time when he didn't exist, and so they generally, I think it's Mormonism that actually teaches he's Satan's brother, and Jehovah's Witnesses, I believe, teach that he's an angel, Michael the Archangel, in human form. So they're basically teaching that he was a man, or an angel, some kind of a spiritual being. But I think Islam would teach that he was a man.
Yeah. A prophet, no less.
A prophet, yeah, but not the Son of God. That's blasphemous, So it's important. I feel like it's very important and has a lot of implications. Was there a time when God, the Bible says God is love? Well, love requires, like sound, it requires a recipient. How can love be expressed? And so if God was a singular being throughout eternity past, was he able? Who did he love? How did he express that love? But in the persons of the Trinity, there's this love relationship, this perfect relationship that the Bible says was not broken until the cross, when God made the ultimate sacrifice. So, I don't know, so do you believe in God or a creator then?
Yeah, I've gotten to the point where it's, over the years I have definitely gotten to the point where, I look at this whole universe, and to me it doesn't, the materialistic viewpoint, to me, that's a dead viewpoint. Like, there's no just, I can't reconcile, being truly, objectively rational and holding on to the materialistic viewpoint, the scientific materialistic viewpoint. I think that science, I think science is it's a good instrument. It's something that nature has to do. When I look at science, when I look at scientists, I don't like. This is gonna sound like disrespectful, but I don't mean it as disrespect. You know, like when I observe scientists doing science, I look at that as a good thing, but I look at that as just like monkeys banging rocks together. It's just like these beings who are trying to figure out what the heck their environment is.
Yeah.
To me, that's what science.
I would say that I look at it that way. If I was able to look at it maybe from God's point of view, from my own, it's like, well, I'm a fellow monkey. So, but so I'll just tell you, as a Christian, my understanding of science is that science could not exist without a creator who has ordered the universe. So science is man's attempt to figure out that order. And what can we learn from all the complexity around us?
Well, science is an attempt to try to figure out that order, but so is religion, and so is philosophy. These three disciplines of the mind, of human development, all of these three independent, but also interacting schools, the scientific school, the religious school, and I don't even want to call it school, I guess you can call it like a group, a sect of humanity, a sect of human understanding, the scientific, the philosophical, and the religious. All of these are just sort of humans attempting to try to, ask the question of what is it?
Yeah.
What the heck, how do we account for the fact that the universe exists? And so each group has their own approach.
Yeah.
And I think
that's where I would say Christians are free to include science.
I think.
Whereas I'm not so sure scientists are free to include, say, religion.
I think so. I think that they are. I think that definitely all three groups can coexist and can feed off of each other. But the problem with that is dogma. That's the main problem. It doesn't matter whether you're in group A, group B, or group C. If you're dogmatically attached to your group and opposed to the others, there's no possibility. But if you open up your mind and you're able to jump from group to group and say, well, what's here? I want to see what I can take from here that's a value.
Yeah.
And I want to go to group C and see what's here that's a value that I can take. I think that's what's really the hindrance. The hindrance isn't the fact that there is some sort of incompatibility with the groups, because there isn't. The issue is the personal individuals who might belong to one or another group and who are dogmatically opposed to the other.
Yeah,
that's
and
the
even
issue.
violently.
Yeah. That's the issue.
Yeah.
The issue is, I think that once you can make an effort to depart from dogmatism and to achieve a certain level of open-mindedness where you can, if you're a scientist, you can talk with a religious person without, with the intention of actually trying to understand what they're trying to tell you.
Yeah.
And in turn, the religious person trying to actually understand what the science person is trying to tell you without saying, no, you're right.
Now, is there a particular issue or thing that turned you from being an atheist to believing that God exists? Because I think you said something like science. Is it that it can't answer certain questions? Or?
Well, yeah, science definitely can answer certain questions. I think that's why if you're a person who's really after the truth, and if you're in the circle of science, you have to eventually, if you're really objective and impartial, you have to understand that science can only go so far. So now,
I think the scientific method demands that we be open to all alternatives, but if they rule out certain theories or certain possibilities, for example, the possibility of miracles, of things that just totally go against maybe the laws of nature. I mean, if you're conducting an experiment to figure out if miracles exist, but ahead of time you're saying, well, I won't accept anything as evidence that defies the laws of nature, then you're going to find out that miracles don't exist because you're ruling out all evidence that would support them.
You're adhering to
So-
you're adhering to, and I feel like that's, that would be an example of adhering to a dogma.
A scientific dogma, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that this is what I was going to say is that a man who's really interested and really seeking the truth, regardless of whether he's in the circle of science, the circle of philosophy, or the circle of religion, he's not going to contain himself in only one of the circles.
Yeah.
He's going to eventually come to realize that, I need to go check out the other circle and the third circle and try to gather as much as I can, impartially, because what I'm after isn't an opinion that this circle holds. What I'm after is, what really is the objective truth. And if possible, I think that really what the ultimate thing, the best thing would be to do is to leave all three circles altogether and just go off into like the darkness and then see what's out there and then come back to the
If that's possible.
It is possible. I think that it is possible, and that's where for me psychedelics were so pivotal. Psychedelics, I don't know, have you ever experimented
No.
with psychedelics?
Like magic mushrooms or, yeah.
The thing that's interesting about things like psychedelics is that, everything that you've acquired throughout your life. We began the conversation by talking about the conditioning of the mind.
Yeah.
Education, learning language, learning culture, learning customs, learning ideologies, learning beliefs, learning religion, learning science, learning everything. Everything becomes part of the network of our mind. It becomes a part of who we are. And we go around living our lives, believing certain things. We're sort of products of the culture into which we were born. And that's how all of us go living our lives. Now with psychedelics, a lot of times it depends on the person. I think that it does depend on the personality. A lot of people, when they ingest psychedelics, they might only get as far as visuals, where they'll have an experience of seeing colors, seeing wavy patterns, seeing distortions, all kinds of visual abnormalities, and then that's it. That's really as far as they'll go. And I think that has a lot to do with who they are as a person. And so, I think that
Or how much they took.
or how I think definitely that's definitely true, because at higher doses, whether you want to or not, everything that you hold on to, that you cling to, is just going to be ripped away from you. There's nothing you can do. And so
That's a little scary.
it's scary. It will be scary because it will feel like you're dying. It literally, like, everything that you cling to as yourself, as your life, as your personality, as your identity, whatever's happening in this experience, there's some force that's trying to separate you.
I mean, I guess the thing that I'm thinking about right now is you're talking about using a physical drug of some sort to change the mind, allow you to see things in a different way, which is understandable. But I guess I want to ask, when you do think of God or the Creator, do you think of a mind that has a personality and has, that you could have a relationship with, or is it more like a power?
It definitely doesn't have I don't think it has a personality. I think it transcends personality. I think,
So when I say personality, I guess...
Personality is an attribute of man. It cannot be an attribute of God. God transcends anything that has to do with man.
Well, Christianity would say God didn't take after us, but we take after God. In other words, we're made in God's image. There are things about us that are very much like God. So it doesn't, to be in an image, an image in a mirror is not the same as the thing itself, right? It's limited in a lot of ways. It doesn't make sound, it's not three-dimensional. We're like God in a lot of ways, but we're not God, and the big mistake we make is thinking we can be God, we can be like God or be the God of our own life. That's what Christianity would teach, right? So I guess what I'm wondering is, so what makes God a person, and I don't mean a human person, but a personality, a mind, is that, and I'm going to refer to him as he, because in the Bible he presents himself as he. He prefers one thing over another. He makes decisions. He chose at one time to bring, the thing that makes me convinced that God is a personality that makes decisions, is throughout all of eternity past, all of a sudden, if nothing else existed, there would be, the whole cause and effect thing isn't there. God is the original cause, and at some point decided to create. And there was nothing else that made him create. Like we make decisions, and we could probably trace back our decisions to a lot of factors that are probably beyond our control. We're controlled by other things, but God would be the one thing that is able to make decisions independent of anything else. And to me, that's the ultimate sign of personality. For no reason other than its own good pleasure, creates. So, and for me, that gives me purpose. Although, maybe I should say God isn't obligated to give me a purpose in life. But I do think there was a purpose he created us for too.
I think so too, man.
So
I definitely think that, I think it would be, whatever God is, I think that it wouldn't make sense for God to be blind. I think God would have to have had some sort of intention in doing whatever he did to create the universe. It wouldn't make sense for this universe to be, because then you're arriving at a sort of, it's all just an accident. God did it by accident.
Yeah. And the thing I kind of want to get back to is, like, even before I even turned the camera on, you said something like that you don't think we can figure it out, right? And I would say I totally agree. I think I did say I agree. This universe is so complicated, and we're so small in it that who are we to think we could figure anything out?
Well, I think that's true, and it's true, and it's also not true, depending upon how we're talking.
Depends on what we're trying to figure out, I guess.
No, well, it depends on how we're talking about it, because we can talk about it either relatively, or we can talk about it absolutely. Or in other words, we can talk about it subjectively, or we can talk about it objectively.
Yeah.
So subjectively, from the point of view of the human organism, from my point of view, the point of view of Felipe, the point of view of Jeff, from the point of view of each particular human being, the universe and whatever it might ultimately be, and how it got there and how to account for it, these questions are unknowable. We can make significant progress.
Now you're saying in a relative?
This is a relative. Relative to
I was thinking we could know things relatively because we know where we stand in comparison to other things, but how do we know the absolute beginning point and end point of absolute truth?
Well, that's where through the relative point we can arrive at the absolute. We can't arrive at absolute. We can't arrive at absolute truth by beginning from the relative situation, from the relative position. From the subjective position, we can't arrive at the objective. And this is...
You're saying you can't?
Oh, it can't. It can be done. It can be done. And this is why I consider psychedelics to be important, because they completely strip one of all subjectivity. They completely eliminate all subjectivity whatsoever, so that a person, the ultimate end of the psychedelic experience is what's called ego death. Ego death is essentially, it's a point in the psychedelic experience in which one is completely disidentified with one's personality. So so at this moment, I'm identified with this body. I'm identified with, these are my hands. I'm on the planet Earth. I have a name. I have certain beliefs. I have certain tastes. I have certain likes. And this is a constant state that I'm usually in. I'm usually in this subjective state that I call Felipe. I'm usually experiencing the world from that perspective. But what happens when one takes psychedelics in sufficient doses, or when one enters profound states of meditation, as they teach in more Eastern religions, one enters into the state of consciousness in which everything that you identify or associate with is completely transcended. You've gone completely above that to the point where you're beyond association. You're no longer associated with neither a thing nor with one who associates. So there's no I who associates with what I like. Even the I is gone. So it's just this state of pure. It's difficult to describe, but it's this state of consciousness in which one recognizes think about it like this. Think about it as think about each one of us as a drop of water, right? Each human being and each living sentient creature is a drop of water. And in fact, all things are drops of water. And the universe is the ocean, of which we're all drops. We're all droplets of water. So there's just this one vast ocean. Now, we live most of our lives completely ignorant of the ocean, or at least we're aware of the ocean. We're aware of the fact that we're interacting with something, but we're interacting with it.
Yeah.
And so, but as far as we're concerned, we're just drops. So I'm a drop. That person over there is a drop. That tree's a drop. That other person over there is a drop. All of us are just independent drops. You know, when one enters these higher states, one sees that it only appears as if we're separate. It only appears.
So you start to see the connections between.
Not only do you see the connection, you see that there is no separation.
Oh, okay.
There's just continuity.
Now the obvious question I think there would be, how can you be sure that it's not just the drug making you think that you have achieved that level of continuity and no separation? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's like maybe you're just getting the perception of.
Well, that's an interesting question. That's an interesting.
I guess that's where idealistic and realistic philosophy comes in.
Yeah. See, that's an interesting question, because you know that you do have to you do have to ask that kind of question. Well, what if it's just a hallucination?
Yeah, maybe the drug's just making me think that I'm thinking that.
Yeah. So, but you do come to a point where that no longer becomes a question. Why? Because you come to the point where you realize that no matter what you perceive, it's all a hallucination. Perception in and of itself can never be anything else besides hallucination. The act of perceiving is the act of hallucinating. Period. It's just a different perception. Yeah. To perceive is to hallucinate a reality. Yeah. And there is no such thing as I'm perceiving the objective real world. And when I'm in a state of altered consciousness, if I take some mushrooms, I'm hallucinating. Yeah. But when the effect wears off, all of a sudden I'm not hallucinating anymore, and I'm experiencing the real world. You know, once you've gotten to the highest point, you realize that all of it's a hallucination. It doesn't matter where on the scale you are. Whether you've taken the shrooms and you're up the top, or whether you're back in normal everyday reality, it's all, perception is exclusively hallucinatory under all circumstances, in every rung of the ladder.
I just wonder, like, you have these experiences, and they're mind-blowing, obviously. But you got to come back to reality, right? I don't know how often you do these.
I've only ever had 4 experiences in my whole life.
But those are enough to be life-changing, would you say?
Or? Well, I mean, I think so, because, you know, I went from atheism to, theism just from those 4 experiences. But I mean, it wasn't just.
I mean, as a Christian, I would say that's a step in the right direction. Yeah. I feel, but the way you got there, I don't necessarily agree with. So for my understanding is that we don't need to discover God through science or on our own or through philosophy. because God reveals himself to us. So, and doesn't reveal everything, and it's a progressive revelation. So like if you read through the Bible, if you can imagine how big God must be and how complicated and how many facets there are to his character, how could all of that be expressed in just the first paragraph of the Bible? It can't, right? It's, we are, as we read through the Bible, this is my experience, as I read through the Bible, I see a progressive revelation of God revealing himself more and more. And so that's why when people say, well, I believe in the God of the New Testament, not the one of the Old Testament.
You feel like it's all part of it. You have to take it all as a whole.
Yeah. And Jesus did. He said, I haven't come to abolish any of the laws, or any of the, the harsh, strict aspects of God from the Old Testament, and actually some of his teachings are even more strict. Like, if you look at his Sermon on the Mount, if you're familiar with that, he was teaching about the old law, and he was expounding upon it. And so he was saying, you've heard it said in the Old Testament that you shall not murder, right? And Jesus said, well, I say to you, if you have anger in your heart towards your brother and you call him a fool, you're in danger of the fire of hell. And so there's this harsh punishment for not just killing someone with your hands, but actually hurting someone with your
like
words.
having an animosity towards them.
Yeah, and so Jesus is, who's more harsh? The God that will punish you if you kill, or the God that will punish you like that if you call someone a bad name? Right.
Well, I think that I don't think that there's a difference. I think that Christ and the God of the Old Testament are both voices of the same being.
Yeah, I do too, and we get I'm so glad that I'm living post, like after Jesus came, because all the people before his coming, they were taught to look forward to this coming Messiah, but they didn't know the details about him. They didn't know what he would be like. So I feel like we can know a lot more about God, by looking. Well, the Bible says if you want to see God in the flesh, look at Jesus.
Well, no, I definitely agree with you, man, because I do consider Christ. If I had to select, the single greatest, and Christ is more than a philosopher. But I've always said that if I had to pick the single greatest philosopher whom everyone should learn the teachings of, I always say Christ. Christ is really where the ultimate truth of this whole reality.
And he, it is said that he borrowed from others that came before him, but like for example, the Golden Rule did not originate with Christ. It might have come from Greek philosophy or wherever, other religions. But he knew enough, it's a good philosopher knows what to take, what's worthy of receiving and expounding upon, so I agree, and
we'll have like an extra later. I'll bring it back in literally 2 minutes.
I don't either, sorry.
It's okay, thank you.
I probably need to get going, but I'll give you my information as far as you can see the video channel. Cool. And then on there is my number, and if you'd like to I'll buy you a coffee or something someday, and we can talk more.
Yeah, man, that'll be really nice.
But so have you read the Bible much, or?
I'm actually, I have a close relationship with the Bible. I actually consider it to be, the best work of literature that man has ever produced.
Yeah.
It's, for me, I just think that it's the highest work of creation that man has ever, and it's divinely inspired.
Yeah.
That's what
I look at it more as like a library, rather than just, it's not just one work, but yeah.
But to me, it's the highest work of genius. It's the culmination of human achievement, from my point of view. I'm currently reading through it.
Okay.
So,
I would love to, talk more.
Yeah.
Not, a lot of people are just not that thoughtful, I meet a lot of people who've grown up with Christian backgrounds and they don't even know what they believe, you know? So most people have this idea that Christianity is...
Well, are you familiar with G.K. Chesterton?
You know, yeah, I've heard of him, I guess. I'm not real good at, like I'll pick up knowledge from here and from
C.S.
there, and then...
Lewis?
C.S. Lewis, I was going to recommend, have you read Mere Christianity?
Yeah, I've been listening to the audiobook of it over the past week or so, trying to like really digest it. Yeah,
I've listened to it over and over again. It's good. It's very good.
I've listened to it twice already over the last week. It's funny that you brought it up, but you know, it's one of those books that I feel like you have to kind of like really listen to it a few times for it to really sink in. But I've been listening to a lot of C.S. Lewis. I've been listening to a lot of G.K. Chesterton, and mainly those two guys. But
did Chesterton influence Lewis?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Lewis. So
he's from like the early 1900s.
Yeah. So C.S. Lewis actually, it was one of Chesterton's books, The Everlasting Man, which C.S. Lewis said had the biggest influence on him in his conversion.
Okay.
But yeah, I think that for me, the reason why I brought up G.K. Chesterton was because in his book The Everlasting Man, he talked about how a lot of us, without even actually understanding what we're reviling against, we turn our back without ever actually seriously considering it.
Yeah.
We turn our back to the church without ever actually having come to a point where we understood what the teachings are.
Yeah.
And so we're tired with something we have no concept of. And so I think it's a powerful book.
The thing I think I really got from C.S. Lewis is just an appreciation for the thing that all religions have in common, which is the fact that we all, according to the Bible, we all have a moral conscience. And so all religions are people dealing with the fact that we have a moral conscience, but we can't keep it, which means it's a God-given conscience. It's not something that we just made up. And so the question is, how can we justify our existence having broken and gone against all that we know to be right and good? And most religions and unthoughtful Christians will say, well, you just have to be a good person, you get rewarded in the next life in some form or another, right? Different religions say how that happens. Christianity says, no, we couldn't be that good. Jesus took God is holy and demands perfection. Even if we were perfect from here on out, we've already sinned, we already deserve, there's a punishment. God's holiness, His righteousness, His justice demands there must be a punishment for the crime. We would need to pay that punishment ourselves, but Jesus took that punishment for us in our place, and in so doing brought us back into the possibility of a right relationship with our Creator.
Yeah.
So I believe it's all about relationship, our relationship with our Creator. And I feel like Christianity is the only religion where we can walk and talk with our Creator, not as equals, but where He commands us to. He's obviously, like, we need to start with a fear of God, but it ends up with true love casts out fear, the Bible says, and so there's a love. So there's no obligation in true, biblical Christianity, because I don't have to measure up. I've already blown it, but Jesus died for me. It's not like I can go through life saying, have I done enough good to deserve heaven? I never will. And so, well, what can I do to thank God because He made that sacrifice for me? That's a different way of looking at religion than what, does my good outweigh my bad, or so I'm excited that you're listening to C.S. Lewis.
Yeah, you
reading
know,
the Bible
I definitely have. I've always just been interested in, you know, I've come a long way from, you know, I don't want to say that I'm, you know, like, I don't want to say that I'm in some way, you know, better than other people, because I don't think that that's true. But, you know, I think that for me, one of the books that changed my life was Amartya Sen. I don't know if you're familiar with Amartya Sen. He's a philosopher. He's an economist. He wrote a book called The Idea of Justice. And essentially in that book, he talked about how everyone's going to have their own opinion of right and wrong. Really, we have to try our best to sort of try to understand that fact. Try to understand that, you know, what you consider to be right is not what another person on another part of the world is interested in. And so,
although I think what Lewis would say is we may disagree on what is right and wrong, but we don't disagree that there is a right and wrong. And yeah,
I think that's what he talks about in Mere Christianity.
Yeah, and he uses like a piano, the notes on a piano to kind of explain that. Like a note could be totally right in this situation, but totally wrong. So I like to think of it as a moral compass, because people from different parts of the planet, you know, their compass might be pointed in a totally different direction, but it's still pointing north. You know, I mean, compared to each other, they're at different angles. You know, but so culturally, we do have our differences, but they're still right and wrong.
The point that I was going to make was, you know, Amartya Sen, essentially what he encouraged was to try to distance yourself from all points of view and just try to, instead of holding on to what you think is right and opposing what another person thinks is right, which is contrary to your right, you know, just sort of try to remove yourself from all of that and try to see everyone's point of view. And so this is sort of that's kind of what's spearheaded me in this direction of being able to, you know, to look at Christianity, to look at Judaism, to look at religion, to look at science, philosophy, everything without taking sides.
Yeah.
I think that's detrimental to the development of understanding.
I think I became a Christian when I was 17, and I think it was so early that, you know, it was too early for me to look at other religions objectively like that. And so maybe it's been harder to do that. These kind of conversations have really helped me, you know. I oftentimes go to IIT and I meet international students, people from whatever religion around the world, and so I really learn a lot, you know. Try to ask
well, that's
a lot of good
good. I
questions.
think that you always have to be, you know, seeking to learn,
and I try to find what do we have in common, you know, because it's easy to look at.
It's impossible to do that. It's impossible to do that so long as you're dogmatically clinging to your worldview and saying my worldview is the correct worldview. All of the worldviews are completely ignorant and primitive and completely wrong. I think that that's just a wrong attitude. I think that you can't get anywhere in that.
Do you think there is a right and wrong? Like, for example, do you think it could be true that one religion is right?
I think that all religions have something. I think that they're all expressions of the truth.
Yeah. I
look at religions as each religion I mean like genuine religions, like religions that are actually worthy.
I think of it as, you know, like if it's lasted many generations, there's some redeeming value to it.
I look at religions in the same way as I look at language. You know, every group on the planet has their own language. You have the French language, the German language, the English language, the Spanish language, all kinds of languages everywhere. But all languages are sort of instruments to express information. And I think I look at religions in very much the same way as cultural instruments that different people around the world use to express the same fundamental idea. The fundamental idea of there being something more than to this universe, there being some sort of some higher power.
Yeah, and with my understanding that, or belief, I guess you'd say, that that there is a moral conscience, a God-given moral conscience, that everyone has it from whatever religion. You know, all religions have value as far as they teach ethics and moral values, and you know, like they're raising their kids to be hopefully peace-loving people. So, in general, you know, I see that, and like I say, I feel like they're all trying to answer that question. You know, what can we do about the fact that we've gone against our moral conscience? So I'll give you my information, and this will probably be on that YouTube channel in a few days. It usually takes me a while to process it and everything.
Okay.
So, all right.
Yeah, man, that sounds awesome, Jeff.
Sounds like you know a lot of people around here. Are you from around here? Or
Yeah, I'm from the back of the Yards neighborhood. It's not too far from here. It's about 2 miles.
Yeah, I teach. I teach at a high school back here.
Yeah, so I like to come out here